Hello and welcome to 18 WJTS Inform. I'm your host, Bill Potter. Joining us in the studio is State Senator Mark Messmer to bring us up to date on what's happening with legislation and where some bills are in either the House or the Senate. Senator, welcome to the show.
Great to be here as always. A nice way to spend my Fridays, coming in to visit WJTS over lunch.
Well, we are glad that you are here. Let's talk about some activities that you think people need to know about, some bills that you've been involved in.
Yep, sure. Well, we had 5 House bills that we moved through final passage this week on the Senate floor. None of them, significant, but I did have some bills that I'm working on that are being heard in the House that made some progress this week. And one of them, and I don't think we talked about it before, it's Senate Bill 144, and it came to the General Assembly from Oliver Winery, and most people are probably familiar with Oliver. They are the largest farm winery in Indiana, by far. And actually, they are the number 29th biggest winery in the country by volume.
Did not know that.
That is a fascinating statistic. And they came to the General Assembly early in session and said, we've had such growth. They've had 40% growth in their out-of-state sales over the past couple of years. And over the last 3 years, they've doubled in overall capacity. And we have a limit in our farm winery statutes that say if you grow enough wine, and I think you can do 1 million gallons a year to be called a farm winery. Half of what you produce, you can import, half of what you grow. So if you grew 500,000 gallons worth of grapes, you could import 250,000 gallons of bulk wine to work with your product. But they have outgrown their capacity to grow it and import, and had a good problem dealing with the growth. So Senate Bill 144 allows any winery to import as much wine as they want without restriction, as long as that's going to be used to be shipped out of state. Okay. And that passed the House or the Senate easily, out of House committee, and is moving along nicely. So glad to solve a problem for a growing company. And by doing that, they'll be able to process all of that wine in Indiana. Mm-hmm. They bring in partially fermented wine. You can actually only buy juice in about 4 months of the year. I mean, when they grow grapes and harvest them, if you're going to buy, juice for wine processing, you have about a 4-month window. When they partially ferment it, they contract with the out-of-state wineries to get the process started. It allows the product to be able to be brought in for longer durations during the year. So glad to see that moving along. Glad to support a strong Indiana business.
Yeah, and continued Indiana business,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Right.
My other bill was Senate Bill 175, and we talked about that earlier. That allows people like Headinger Beverage to have more surety in their contracts with what we called, right now it just says you can't terminate a contract unfairly. And we put in what good cause is, and really is it's in their contract now with Anheuser-Busch, but allows more surety that they're long-term, and most of these contracts go on in perpetuity. But just better defines what good cause is, and that passed out of committee as well. House Bill 111 that I'm working on with Representative Lindauer. He authored the bill, and it allows county commissioners, they have to go to road school sometime in their first 2 years they're in office, and then it allows them the option to go to road school as they need it. Okay. There's 2 sections of code that training requirement falls in under. One, local government section, you don't have to go after your first 2 years, and another one said you have to go every year, and this really just reconciles a conflict. We did find that out in the Senate committee this week, and it passed out of committee unanimously. It was on second reading on Thursday, and it'll be up for final passage on Monday. Another
example of a lot of the bills that go through are just simply cleanup bills.
Cleanup, yep.
Fix things that were,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Just a better way to spend people's tax money.
Okay.
I mean, why have to go every year? Doesn't make any sense. Another bill that I'm working on is Senate Bill 271 that we talked about a little bit in the first half of session. And as we got it to the House committee, it's going to be heard on Monday. The Indiana Department of Environmental Management has the option to take over administration for monitoring and closure of what they call coal ash ponds at power plant sites. And if they didn't make a decision to take over administration of that process, they had to notify the EPA by May, and they had to have the rulemaking pretty much in place by the end of the year. Otherwise, the EPA would take over monitoring that. And to a great degree, businesses in Indiana would much prefer dealing with, dealing with a state-leveled administration rather than the federal government.
Why is that having to be a bill?
Mm-hmm. Well, for the state to, really what we do is we set up the process that allows them, they have some rulemaking authority, but they wouldn't be able to adopt a rule, they could adopt the rule, but they wouldn't have any way to, and here's the biggest sticking point, they wouldn't have the ability to set the fees that it takes to pay to run the program. So we set the framework in place that gives them rulemaking authority, sets out what the annual fees will be for the power plant companies for ongoing maintenance of the program. So without the ability to charge the fees, they could do it, but they wouldn't get paid for it, and they really can't afford to adopt another program that's going to take hundreds of thousands of dollars to administer and more employees without getting. And the utility companies were completely on board. They actually were the ones that brought the issue to me. They said, we know it's going to cost money. It's going to cost money to set it up. It's going to cost money to run it. We're willing to pay it. We'd just rather pay that to the state and trust the long-term working relationship they have with IDEM on other issues.
And then you have another bill having to do with
a bill that I
wetlands.
was a co-author on the first half of session. It's called Senate Bill 389, and I'm sure some folks have probably seen posts about it on social media. Got a lot of attention the first half of session. And what the bill did, or at least does at this point, there's a program called Isolated Wetlands that's managed by IDEM. And I do really work hard at trying to get things done in a constructive manner with Indiana Department of Environmental Management. But sometimes they have divisions that get a little heavy-handed. They get a little bit aggressive in how they deal with my constituents. And there had been consistent complaints with folks who were maybe farmers who had maybe drainage tiles or ditches that hadn't got maintained, and then had an area that got some cattails growing in it, and that technically is a Class 1 wetland. And just due to lack of maintenance or say broken field tiles, maybe road construction that damaged some drainage, that things didn't drain right, and stuff didn't get resolved quickly, and IDEM was making them pay to remediate that by they said they would tell the farmer, you can put that back into crop production, but we're going to charge you $80,000 an acre to build another wetland somewhere else to replace it. Well, agricultural operations are supposed to be exempt. They would determine that if you stop producing it for just a short amount of time, that it was no longer agricultural, and if you wanted to reestablish it, it was going to cost you. And people paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to remediate, or just losing production of their cropland was problematic. And then people that were developers, they maybe bought a piece of farm ground at the edge of the city limits, wanted to move a housing development or commercial development into it, and all of a sudden that agricultural property, once it wasn't being farmed anymore, they said, well, you can't just move in there. You're going to have to pay the what they called in lieu of fee, or pay to build another wetland somewhere else. And so worked with them. So what we did in the first half of session, and I had tried to get them to be more conciliatory, to my constituents over the past few years. Me and a few other senators, and actually we had 24 co-authors on the bill, that said we're just going to strike the isolated wetland program from your jurisdiction. Only 8 states regulate isolated wetlands anyway, so it's not done that often. And we understand that there are some water quality benefits to maintaining isolated wetlands, even though they're not what you would look at. You look at a swamp area or a goose pond or a duck pond, wildlife habitats you'd normally look at. Those are jurisdictional wetlands almost all the time. And anytime a wetland is connected to a body of water, it's regulated by the EPA. When there's no body of water connected to it, it's considered an isolated wetland. And I can give our viewers a great example of an isolated wetland that really is descriptive of what almost all the state-regulated isolated wetlands are. If you go to Huntingburg, turn west on 14th Street, right there by the Dairy Queen as you're heading toward the event center. And as you're heading toward the event center, just as you pass the Dairy Queen, look to your left. There's a little patch of woods in a low spot. That is an isolated wetland. And that's what almost all of the isolated wetlands that IDEM regulates encompass. And they have agreed within a municipality, if it's less than a half an acre, it'll be exempt. And they have agreed, we've got it all in writing, we're working on getting the bill heard in a couple, not this Monday, but next Monday. If it's been farmed in the last 10 years, it's exempt from any regulation, whether you put it back in a farming operation or you put it into development of, commercial development. 10 years, it's free from any oversight by IDEM. If you're, and there's also what they call ephemeral streams. I mean, that would be just the water channel in your backyard that runs the water out of your yard. That's an ephemeral stream. And if there is an ephemeral stream within the isolated wetland space, they're no longer going to regulate the ephemeral streams either. So I think that was done by a federal law change last summer, but the state never really updated their laws on that. A few other small provisions of it, but really the big thing was it allows farmers, even in a Class 2 or Class 3 wetland that would be a much more developed wetland, if they've got a drain pipe running through one that serves the drainage in a non-wetland area, it allows them to get in and fix and maintain their own their drainage pipes, whether it's privately owned or county owned, even on a Class 2 or Class 3 wetland, allows with minimal disturbance, get in and fix your pipe so you don't end up creating another wetland just from lack of maintenance.
And this does not affect any wetlands which are, as you call them, jurisdictional.
Doesn't touch them. Yeah.
And those are under the EPA?
Yes.
Not under the DNR?
Correct. Federal EPA. I think the DNR does some, whenever you mess with one and get in trouble, the DNR is usually the group that comes in and takes care of the cleanup. They do control floodway and flood zone areas, but not technically. The wetland areas are either EPA or IDEM, but then there are some soil and water conservation office oversights. There's a lot of agencies that touch drainage and soil conservation, which a lot of times end up touching isolated wetlands or jurisdictional wetlands. So it's kind of a mess. I think there's actually 5 agencies that touch that area.
Somewhat confusing.
Very much.
Okay. Well, it's a good thing that we have bills that
try to help
clean
fix
some of that.
Yep.
Well, Senator, thank you very much for coming in.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
Our guest on WJTS Inform has been State Senator Mark Messmer, who joins us on Fridays to bring us up to date on what's happening in the Senate and in the House as well. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Great to be here. Thanks.
Thank you for watching 18 WJTS. We are local people watching local people.